Sad tweet this week is more like a sad novel. You can't just narrow it down to one tweet. But the award is shared equally by Ric Flair and his now former podcast co-host Mark Madden, who had a very public, very nasty breakup on Twitter this week. Yet another divorce for the Nature Boy. Madden had been friends with Flair dating back to 1987. He was there with him in WCW through the late 90s into the early 2000s when Madden was working for the company behind the scenes, and he did commentary as well. For those who don't know, Mark Madden has been a sports talk radio host in Pittsburgh for many, many, many years. Outside of his time in wrestling, he's been doing the sports talk thing in Pittsburgh for a very long time. Madden is the one, if you remember from my This Week in History segments, he's the one who faxed a copy of the Bill Watts interview with the Pro Wrestling Torch back in the early 90s. Because Watts had done an interview with Wade Keller. And then he was brought in to be the head booker for WCW. Only after that, I believe I have the timeline right, only after that was the interview published. And when that interview was published, it raised a lot of eyebrows because of a lot of comments that he made in that interview. Madden saw the interview. He took it upon himself to fax a copy of the interview to Hank Aaron, one of the greatest baseball players of all time, Hammer and Hank, who at the time was working with the Atlanta Braves. All of this was under the auspices of, Turner and Ted Turner, as WCW was at that time. Madden told Aaron about the racist remarks that Watts made in that interview, and that ultimately is what led to Watts either quitting or being fired as head booker of WCW, depending on who you believe. But in November came the announcement that Mark Madden was going to be Ric Flair's co-host on this new podcast that Flair was starting, called Ric Flair Woo Nation Uncensored. This is not the first podcast that Ric Flair has done. He had a podcast previously with his son-in-law, Conrad Thompson. That lasted a whopping 46 episodes before he got bored with it. Then he had another short-lived podcast called The Ric Flair Show, which was hosted on MLW Radio. That lasted all of 5 months. So this was his third. He really does. He really does treat his podcast like he does his wives. So this was his third podcast, and honestly, it's too bad. Because think of all the stories that this man has to tell over the course of his long, illustrious career. As long as Ric Flair has been in the wrestling business for, all the things that he's done, all the championships he's won, all the people he's worked for, the roads that he's traveled, the Horseman days, right? The Monday Night War period, the Evolution days in WWE, right up until the very end. All the stories that this guy could potentially tell could have been really something interesting. But a lot of those episodes, because I checked it out when it first premiered, if you check out a lot of those episodes, maybe it's his age or whatever, because, he's 70-something years old, but those shows are almost unlistenable. Now, I don't care for Mark Madden. I have no use for Mark Madden, and he even said when they first announced this show with Flair, when the announcement was first made, he went on social media, I think, and he said the only reason he took the gig was to give the wrestling marks another chance to be upset. Because I got to do it, and they never did, which is my primary goal in taking the job. I don't remember if it was on social media. It might have been in the press release or announcement that went out. That's a quote from Mark Madden. He said that's the only reason why he took the job, was to upset the marks. Which is a very weird reason to take a job. To piss off wrestling fans. Well, here we are 5 months later, and the only one upset seems to be Mark Madden. How's that working out for you? Seriously, the only person in the world who could not see how this was going to end was Mark Madden. All the so-called wrestling marks could see this coming from 5 miles away. I doubt any of them were jealous over the inevitable knife that he was going to get right in the back. In fact, I wonder which podcast host it was who joked about this very thing happening back in November when this was first announced. I wonder who that was. Yeah, remember what I said? I said we should take bets on whether this show survives longer than his last podcast. Now I only wish I had taken that bet. I would have cleaned up very nicely. In case you couldn't figure it out by now, Mark Madden is no longer part of Ric Flair's podcast. The drama began on Sunday. All these things happen on the day that I drop the fucking podcast every single week. Well, later that day is when all this drama unfolded. With a single tweet that was really not dramatic at all by Mark Madden, who said, "I am leaving the Flair Uncensored podcast effective immediately. It is not a good fit for me, especially scheduling the prep and taping during my jam-packed work week. Thanks to Ric Flair and Podcast Heat for the opportunity and for understanding." That all sounded nice enough, right? Nothing controversial about that, outside of him leaving the show, which was always going to get people talking. But in terms of what he said there, nothing controversial at all. But Ric Flair couldn't help himself and had to set the record straight, had to make it clear that it was his decision to get rid of Madden and not Mark's decision to walk away because of his busy schedule. Flair said, "Love and appreciate you, Mark Madden, but actually, I relieved you of your duties. Best of luck with your work. I'll be back and better than ever next Monday, going home to my son-in-law at Hey It's Conrad." So the show is continuing, but he's running back to his son-in-law to run it for him. Good luck with that. Madden responded in a series of tweets. He said, "Okay, that's true. And now, soon, I can tell the whole real story. Like how we lost the deal with Podcast One. Love and appreciate you, also, but hey, as long as we're telling the truth. Truth is always good, right? And by the way, you didn't have the balls to tell me that you were firing me. You said the podcast was canceled, period. Your son-in-law had to tell me the truth. Why couldn't you just let it go? Why couldn't you just be a friend after 35 years? Rick 1 week, I want the podcast to be current. Rick the next week, who's Jay White? I've never heard of him." And then he put FFS for fuck's sake. Flair then responded, "Mark, it's so sad. You've been telling everybody for 30 years that I'm the greatest wrestler ever. Quit trying to get the rub that made you who you are. Look forward to hearing you on the Pat McAfee show. Oh wait, sorry, he canceled you too. Just be happy and enjoy life." Things got real personal after that, and I grabbed my popcorn as Madden replied, "Have another drink. God gave you the gift of life a few years back, and you thank him by getting shit-faced every single night like you are right now. You are the greatest wrestler ever. What you have become is sad." He continued, "Listen, I'm sorry it came to this, but I'm not the reason it came to this. I took the high road and he just couldn't do that. He lied to me and then embarrassed me. Fuck that. I don't give a fuck who he is." And replying to somebody else's tweet, Madden said, "He was never my friend. He actually said that tonight in a phone message." And then he revealed this interesting nugget, which is what I said on the podcast months ago. I mean, it was so obvious that this is what happened. But Madden said, "Rick was planning to work at AEW until the Dark Side of the Ring episode. Not sure what Tony Khan thought. Khan doesn't talk to Rick now. He disinvited Rick from his birthday party." I absolutely believe, 100% believe, that Ric Flair would have ended up managing Andrade and AEW. And probably would have made his debut at that Arthur Ashe show in September in New York, were it not for the plane ride from hell stuff bubbling up again after that Dark Side of the Ring episode aired. I mean, who would hire the man after that? He was like the fucking Toxic Avenger after that. Nobody was going to touch him. But things worked out for the better. AEW didn't need Flair anyway. But it was interesting to hear Madden admit to what seemed so obvious to me at the time, which is that Rick was angling for a job in AEW. Doesn't sound like there were actual conversations or negotiations for it with Tony Khan. But of course, Flair thought he was going to go to AEW. I mean, it only made sense with him asking out of his WWE contract. Remember, he went public and said he wanted out of his WWE contract. Why else would he do that? Well, because WWE was stopping him from doing certain endorsements and stuff? Maybe that was part of it. But you don't think that Ric Flair didn't have it in his mind that he was going to end up working for AEW? You don't know what you're talking about. As far as his podcast goes, maybe Conrad can do a better job of keeping him more focused than Madden did. All he seemed to do with the show is use it as a vehicle to just constantly bash Becky Lynch, who he has an unhealthy obsession with. As far as their 35-year friendship coming to an end, I've said it before. Ric Flair very much strikes me as a what have you done for me lately type of person. If the show wasn't doing as well as he had hoped, he could just blame Madden for it and get rid of him. And he would pay no mind to it because that's just how the man is. Said a lot, I think, about the type of person he really is when he called WWE the most insensitive company in the world because nobody bothered to call or text him after the news broke of his latest relationship fail. The company that bailed him out of so many situations over the years and had a new Hall of Fame ring made for him with his late son's name inscribed on it after he slipped the first one into his son's casket when he passed away. That spoke volumes to me about the kind of person that Ric Flair is. And now he can add another championship to his resume. He and Mark Madden both. Sad tweet co-champions for this week.